And welcome to the first episode of Cyber Uncovered, our new webinar series where we explore real-world cyber risks that are facing the businesses are facing today. This is episode 1, how to plan for the breach you didn't plan for. I'm just going to give people just 10, 20 seconds, 30 seconds just to have an opportunity to join so that they don't miss too much of the content. And in fact, as we do that, I'll start to just go through the agenda, which was well publicised as to what we'll be talking about, but just to give you a flavour. So we're going to talk about some of the famous or infamous incidents that we saw in the media last year, and show us, and we'll go through what that revealed about the weaknesses that these organisations are facing, as well as organisations just like yourselves. We'll look at the common blind spots. So, you know, what are the vulnerabilities that threat actors are taking advantage of? And, you know, more and more firms are spending money on cyber security tech, yet we're still getting hit by them. And, you know, there's reasons why these things happen, and hopefully we'll uncover some of that stuff today for you. You know, what do you need to do to be ready for an incident? I think nowadays it's probably more likely it's a when, not an if, you're going to be the victim of some form of cyber breach. And I guess the impact of that's going to depend heavily on what you do at the beginning to try and prevent that from happening, and how prepared you are should it happen. And we'll obviously have a look at what an incident response plan looks like, so that you can work under pressure, because it's a highly stressful situation if it does go wrong. And we'll give you some ideas on things that you can do as we go through it as well. For those that haven't joined a Mitigo webinar before, just to give you a little bit about who we are, I suppose. At the bottom of that slide there, you can see our accreditations. As you can imagine, we have the accreditations that you would expect us to have. We're CREST accredited. We're assured service providers through the National Cyber Security Centre. We're able to certify for Cyber Essentials, Cyber Essentials Plus. We work in the financial services sector, and so on and so forth. We work through across many industries, predominantly professional services. As you can see, we partner with the Law Societies of England, Wales, Scotland, Bar Council, the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England, Wales and Scotland, Royal Institute of British Architects, and PIMFA, which is finance. But as I say, there are many industries that we work in. Professional services, why there? Obviously, there's a lot of data that people in professional services hold. They're highly targeted, and they can make quite a lot of money for the threat actors, unfortunately. Mitigo ourselves, we are not an IT firm. We are a risk management firm. We work with organizations to allow them to understand and manage their cyber risk. Unfortunately, we also work with firms that have been the victims of cybercrime, and I can promise you here and now, it's better to do the preventative stuff, because the outcome, if you haven't done much of that, is pretty nasty. Before we get going, we're just going to pop a poll up on screen, gets you involved, you know, and tells me a bit more about the people that have joined today. So, how prepared do you feel for a cyber incident? So, is it A, fully prepared? We do regular risk assessments. It's tested incident response plan. I'm mostly prepared, so I've got some controls but no testing, and I'm somewhat prepared. Our IT tells us we're covered. I'm not very prepared. We know we should do more, and I've got no idea. It's not something that we've looked at. I'm assuming that not many will answer E in this day and age, but we put it up there because you never know. One thing that appears not to be coming on my screen are the results of that poll, but it's always useful if you don't mind. Sometimes I can talk through that, but I can't see them on my screen. So I'll give it another 10 or 20 seconds anyway, so that you can fill those in, because it's information that helps us to understand what the wider audience is doing even after these sessions today. So, as I say, I think at some point that poll will end in the next 5 to 10 seconds. I think that's it. Moving on. So let's talk a little bit about the stuff that we saw last year in 2025. So there were more than three major attacks, but the ones that we all know about, let's start with Marks and Spencer's. Ransomware attack encrypted their systems. It disrupted their operations. We know that. How did the criminals get in? From what we understand, it was social engineering. So they gained information about somebody in a third-party IT company, on an IT help desk, I think abroad, and that third party had access into M&S's main system. So they've gained some information that's tricked somebody to allow them access in through the side door, if you like. I think we know the impacts. We saw it across the news, but it looked like it was about £300 million of revenue loss for an organisation like M&S. So big impact. Then we saw the Co-op. Interestingly, almost identical. It was the same ransomware group that carried out the attack, and again, a couple of $100 million in revenue loss. Different systems were attacked on this one, and interestingly, if you've ever seen there was a note from the chief exec, I think it was in October, through the National Cybersecurity Centre, who said actually they were really proud of how they dealt with the attack because they'd done so much preparation. In advance of being able to recover, and she was saying that it could have been an awful lot worse, this attack, but 206 million seems pretty bad to me. And then, of course, probably one of the biggest ones that we've seen of all time, really, which was Jaguar Land Rover, certainly from a financial consequence, because it didn't just impact JLR, it impacted the wider business infrastructure around their plants, certainly here in the UK. Again, we believe it was the same group that hit M&S and the Co-op, so more likely that they targeted these big organisations. We think this one might have been phishing. We obviously don't get all of the information if we've not been involved in it, but 5,000 companies affected by the supply chain, production impacted by 5 to 6 weeks. And I guess it would be easy for you to sit here and think, well, that's all well and good. These are big organizations that can, face off that sort of financial loss. But at the same time, does it only happen to organizations like that? And unfortunately, it doesn't. It happens to organizations of all shapes and sizes. And the issue here is it's vulnerability that is the target generally of a threat actor. So if you have some form of vulnerability, they use it to exploit you, to get into your system. Once they're into the system, then they can work out what you're worth. Okay. And if we start to look at the lessons learned from just those ones, those attacks I've just talked about, this is indicative of all types of industry and sector, and businesses of all sizes, because it was humans and processes that were exploited to get into the system via the supply chain, which is, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment, of how they're doing that. And there were, I believe the chief exec of M&S said they recognised after the attack that they had some governance gaps there. But what's really interesting, if you think about it, threat actors need two things to carry out a cyber attack. One is access into the system, and the second is to do what they want when they're in there. And the biggest lesson here is, you can put up any amount of perimeter security that you want, but if they use your supply chain to enter into it, and there's a blind spot, a gap that you're not sure of, it will bypass your technical control. And that's what happened here, is that is the learning, is technical controls don't always save you. Yes, you've got to have them, and they've got to be set up correctly, but it's people and it's business processes and it's behaviors that cause the issue. Just thinking about supply chain attacks, and because that is what we're seeing, this side door, if you like, into the systems. Let's think about your business sat in the middle there. As you can see, you've got clients out to the right, and then you've got services that you will use within your supply chain. So, platforms such as 365, you've got various suppliers that you'll work with, various cloud services you use, your managed service provider, your IT company. They're all part of your supply chain, an integral part of it. The threat actors will be aiming at your clients, because it could be that they get into your client's email system, for example, and then send an email from there, which ends up in your inbox. You click on it, and that allows the attack to manifest itself. But it's come again from come from your supply chain. Obviously, they're going to be looking directly at you. So can they breach through your security? And I'm going to use a case study in a moment, which demonstrates that, unfortunately. And then again, we've got them attacking the various institutions, platforms, suppliers that you interact with, because if they can get into any of those, then they've got access then into your business. So unfortunately, it's coming at all angles, and threat actors have worked this out. And so you've got to be on your guard. You've got to understand where your weaknesses are within your supply chain, where your own weaknesses are, and so on and so forth. And so the things that we're seeing this, in the last 12 months, and it's ever changing, by the way, risk management when it comes to cyber, because the criminals, the threat actors, keep changing how they work. So supply chain social engineering, absolutely. Phishing, AI has been increasingly utilized when it comes to phishing attacks, making them far more believable, so that you fall for them, and also the fact that they can then avoid things like your multi-factor authentication. They'll also be looking at your browser extensions, so password managers, and trying to target if they can get hold of your passwords. And then phishing, so voice attacks, so phoning you up and pretending to be from your IT provider, and trying to take control of your device remotely. Hi, it's such and such from ABC IT. I need to do an update on your laptop. Just click on this website and I can just do that very quickly for you. And people fall for it, otherwise they wouldn't do it. It is a numbers game, and I guess we would like to think that we wouldn't be duped, but it happens. But what you can see there, again, these are just all methods of bypassing that perimeter security to get into the system. And so whilst you're putting in place, swanky endpoint protections, security operation centers, or whatever they might be, these people are incredibly astute at being able to get through it. And the bit that I've put at the bottom there is that they'll also then exploit any weak technical controls that you have, because they can exploit weakness to gain entry. So if you've got things, and again, my case study is going to show this in a moment, of how they can get through a weak technical perimeter. But then once they get inside, if you haven't got the right technical setup, from a security perspective, they're going to be able to do pretty much whatever they like, and that's carte blanche. And as I say, I think I was on a webinar the other day and someone asked me these two questions, and I thought they were good questions, and I thought I'd just go through them with you. But then I'm going to use a case study to kind of highlight and demonstrate, the things that you need to be doing in order to prevent this from happening. So question one was, well, what's the one thing that firms always say they thought they had under control, but they didn't? Well, actually, the common denominator is they say, well, I thought IT were dealing with this. And so they don't know what the controls were. It was just that somebody else was responsible and had it covered, but there was no oversight or assurance that that was the case. It was an assumption, and I'm afraid that is probably the biggest reason as to why we see breaches happening, is a lack of understanding of risk and the wrong people doing the job. And that's not IT bashing, it's to understand that cyber risk management and IT are completely different disciplines. And then we have this person said to me, when firms say they're confident when it comes to cyber, what are they usually confident in, and what are they often missing? Well, I think the confidence is often misplaced because they just assume someone else is doing it. But actually, it isn't just one thing. It comes down to misunderstanding your risk, and if you misunderstand your risk, or you don't know what your risk really is, then you can't control it effectively. And as I move on now into this case study, I think this will give you a better understanding of how it worked. And I haven't put this up to sort of intentionally scare people, but I think it's really important that you understand that these are the things, if you're not thinking about these things, this is what's going to happen. So this happened literally in the last couple of weeks. We were called in to deal with it. It's a professional services firm, about 25 members of staff, so not Jaguar Land Rover, just a normal high street firm. And on the Saturday, somebody tried to log in from home into their system, and when they got there, they realized that their system was encrypted through a ransomware attack. So the first thing that the company did is they went to their external IT provider and they said, we've got a ransomware attack. Obviously, panic was setting in a little bit. IT said, look, let's have a look at your backup and see if we can restore it. So it turned out that the Friday's backup had been encrypted by the threat actors, but fortunately Thursday's had not. So IT were able to restore the full system over the course of the weekend back to Thursday. So they lost a day's work. So everybody breathed a sigh of relief and moved on. The following Tuesday, clients and staff started to receive emails from the threat actors, because as part of the attack, the ransomware attack, the threat actors had exfiltrated their data. And as we go through, obviously you want to know what data has been exfiltrated. And it was at this point where they realized that the IT hadn't, they'd given them a clean bill of health, but they hadn't actually recognized what had gone on. They didn't really understand the anatomy of an attack. So we were engaged to come in and find out what had gone on, how they got in, what they had taken, what data they'd taken, and what had happened. And effectively, what was interesting is in the backup, the ransomware payload was in Thursday's information. So the IT firm had restored the ransomware, the malware back into the system, because the criminals had actually been in the system from the Tuesday before. So any information that was sat in there from that payload was restored back in. So that meant the threat actors were still inside the system the following week. Then we obviously needed to start having a look at what data had been taken. So how they got in, they had a remote desktop, and that was compromised. It was what we call brute forced. Effectively, they throw usernames and passwords at it, 200,000 attempts, and they got it right. And so poor protocols around the RDS allowed the threat actors in. So lack of multi-factor authentication and other things. The interesting thing is that there was a trigger. The antivirus did quarantine the ransomware initially, the malware. It recognized it was a problem and it quarantined itself. However, what the threat actors did is they climbed into the system, they went to the antivirus, they made themselves administrators, and they disabled the antivirus and released the payload from the quarantine into the main system. Therefore, the antivirus did not act in the way that both the IT or the company believed that it should and could have done. With regards to how much data had been taken, the problem was there were a couple of ways that we could try to look at it. The first is we look at logs within the system, because it can show us, data loss, how much, the movement of data. But unfortunately, those logs were deleted when the restore was done, because we were now working on a system that was from the Thursday, not from when the actual attack took place on the Saturday. So we couldn't work that out through that. And then unfortunately, when we looked at the firewall and the router that would allow us to be able to see the data movement in and out of the system, it only showed the last 12 hours of activity. Well, here we were on the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday doing our investigations, yet we were trying to look for information that had happened much earlier in the week, unfortunately. So we couldn't give them the answer to that, other than, you're going to have to wait and see how many other clients are going to be contacted here. So there's lots of things here that went wrong. Okay. So why it happened? So there was no risk assessment. So the preparation, if this webinar today is about preparing for and recovering from a cyber attack, then there was no preparation, because the risk assessment hadn't been carried out to understand the weaknesses that the organization had. The firewall controls were weak, the remote desktop was weak, there was no data loss prevention in place, the AV didn't work, the alerting didn't work. The threat actors had freedom to do pretty much what they wanted, and no one knew what they were doing when they were in there. And unfortunately, the MSP didn't really understand it. The impact was quite significant, as you can well imagine. The first thing, unfortunately, that the business said to us is we thought our IT was dealing with it. The second big surprise was, you're going to have to report this. It was personal data to the ICO and to your regulator, and obviously that will be investigated as we go on. There's a lot of clients quite unhappy about that. There's quite a lot of reputational damage here. It was highly stressful, lots of phone calls, lots of what am I going to do, what are my clients going to do. Obviously a lot of cost involved, and I think the kicker at the bottom there is this organisation was going through due diligence as part of a sale in the future. As to whether that will happen now, who knows. On the right hand side of this was part of an email message that came from the threat actors, as you can see, 24 hours, just over 24 hours in. You've been warned, the 24-hour period has expired and you haven't contacted us, because they reach out to say contact us so we can talk about the ransom payment, so that we don't, so we can give you the de-encryption key, we can stop releasing your data. Then they've put, we've published a blog about your company's data breach. The preview timer is a countdown to the actual data release. So when you log in, what they do on the blog is they put some information out, and then they have a timer to say, by the time this runs out, if you haven't paid us, we'll release the rest of the data that we hold. And then we'll begin distributing these links to your clients, employees, partners, media, and government agencies, and we'll wait for 48 hours. So, put yourself in the position of the people. If this was your business, what would that mean to you? Pretty scary stuff, I'm afraid, but this is what happens. This is what we deal with, and this is in the last couple of weeks, as I mentioned. One of the things that I think highlights why this isn't always an IT thing, and organizations just fall foul of relying on IT, is we expect you and your IT provider to be providing technical cyber security solutions to you, and you will have those, and you will have some, a lot of faith in those. Sometimes that's misplaced, that faith. And the reason that I'm confident in being able to say that is we took a look at the last 500 vulnerability audits that we carried out on firms, and these were the critical risk ratings, or the common technical blind spots that firms thought they had covered and didn't. So 96% of those 500 audits had user access management risks. What does that mean? It means that it would be quite easy for a threat actor to get into the system, because the management of access wasn't done tightly enough. All of you will have some form of multi-factor authentication in place, yet 77% of the audits that we look at don't have it set up properly or covering the whole of the business, because there's no oversight. They don't get to, they just, yes, it's been turned on, but has it been turned on properly, and is everybody covered by it? And there's no visibility of that. Again, 3/4 of firms have patching updates missing. We all have those little things that come on our laptops or our iPhones and say, can you update the bit of technology? You've got to do it, because criminals can take advantage of those weaknesses. Again, almost 3/4, their email security isn't set up correctly. So the filters that would keep out some of the phishing emails or the spam that can cause these problems isn't set up. By default, all of these things are turned off when you buy technology, and it's up to you and your IT or us to sit there and tell you how to turn it on properly. 3/4 of the firms we deal with, that's an awful lot out of 500, aren't doing it right. 65% of the organizations that we inspect have antivirus problems, so critical risk ratings there, and network security in over half the cases is poor. All of these things mean that, if the criminals got in, it's quite easy to get in, but secondly, when they get in, they can pretty much do what they want to do. And I think that starts to drive home the importance of preparation and the things that you need to do. So jumping ahead then into preparation. So we've understood, the impact of this and the lessons that we're learning here, but what you do prior to an attack really is going to determine how bad that attack is going to be. So the impact, so the likelihood of it happening, the impact of it, and then obviously how quickly you can get out of it. So that you've got what you would call here pre-incident, what you do to help prevent the incident, and then the post-incident, what you do during and after that incident. So if we look at pre-incident, and now we'll start getting into some handy hints, if you like, these stages happen to be the government's cyber governance code of practice that they brought out in April last year. But I think it's just a simple rule book to follow. Is risk assessment, strategy, people, incident planning, assurance and oversight. And what does that look like? Well, risk assessment. The majority of organizations do not have any form of cybersecurity risk assessment conducted outside of themselves or their IT provider. So the first is, are you having risk assessments conducted? And the second is, who is doing it for you? You have to have the people with the right skills, and they really shouldn't be marking their own homework anyway. Yeah, so it should be an independent third party, be that us or be that someone else. You know, why do these things happen? Just take a look at that example I gave you a moment ago. Dependency on IT that weren't able to be able to understand what the risks were. So it was easy to happen and they couldn't get out of it properly. The scope of the risk assessment is also misunderstood. You cannot just look at technology. You have to look at the people. If you think about it, all of these um, attacks that I've been talking about took advantage of people and processes and lack of policy or governance. So the scope of any risk assessment has to take into account the processes and behaviours of your people. Yes, the technology, that's vital, but also then what policies you have and whether you have good governance to ensure that your policies are working. And how often should you do your risk assessment? Well, I do it at least annually because threat actors change the way they work, and as will you. But that's a good rule of thumb anyway. Once you've done your risk assessment, then you can work out what your cyber strategy is. You know, I think what's really interesting is we talk to a lot of organizations that go through cyber breaches and they say, I've spent loads of money on this technology to stop these things from happening. We say, yeah, but what did your risk assessment say about what your strategy should be, about the decisions that you make in order to manage that cyber risk, about the money that you spend on that technology? Was it the right technology? Has it been configured in line with the problems that you've got? And I think because we missed the first step of doing the risk assessment, we therefore don't have a proper strategy. We have, unfortunately, more hope than we do proof or evidence. And that also can lead you astray from aligning with what your regulatory obligations are, and obviously misspent money or overspend on money, and as I say, not having the evidence that you know that the strategy is actually working. If we move on to people, we know that 85% of breaches are because humans have done something that they shouldn't. You know, do you understand the behavioural and procedural risk that your people bring to the organisation? Are you training them with cyber awareness training? Do you do simulated phishing? Do you have a culture of cybersecurity throughout the organisation? Because people are the first line of defence, or one of the first lines of defence, because they're the things that are going to click on the thing that you don't want them to click on. Conscious of time, there's a lot of content, so I may run over a bit. But if you can bear with me, that's great. If not, I'm sure we can make recordings available to you. But building an incident response plan. So this is critical. You've got to get this done prior to any breach. Yeah. And yes, it's going to take you time. And yes, you probably need some help and some input. But you know, these are the steps that we'd recommend. So risk assess your systems, your people, and your data. Understand the problems and the risks that you've got. Then you can start to think about, right, what would happen if? So you create a response team that has defined roles internally and externally, i.e., who are you going to turn to if this goes wrong? In the case study that I went through, they went to the wrong people. Yes, they should talk to their IT, but themselves or IT should have said, you need to bring in an expert. And of course, the firm are then scratching around for, well, who do I bring in? Get that worked out early. Work out what your response guidelines are for communication, because you know the clients were being emailed their own data saying we've breached X provider to you. Press are going to get involved, regulators get involved. You need to have that lined up. How are you going to communicate emergencies, because your emails are probably compromised, so you can't be emailing people. And then obviously work out how bad this is if it's going wrong. Train your staff, train your response team. Check that your backup and your recovery is configured correctly, that it's stored right. You saw the issue that I went through with that firm. Very often the backups get completely compromised. They were lucky they lost a day of it, but obviously that restore also re-delivered the payload that they shouldn't have allowed. And then you test the plan. You do a desktop simulation. We do that with firms all the time. And then you work about the deployment of incident response, so identification, whether you can contain it, eliminate it, categorize it and report it, recover from it, and then the lessons that you learn. Again, these are slides that you can take away to have a read of. But I think some of the most important messages that I can give you today is the last stage here. Well, the first stage is risk assessment, but it's having the right people do it that give you the independent oversight and assurance that you've understood your risk and that you are managing it. And that will flow through many facets of your organization, allowing you to be able to demonstrate to your clients, to yourselves, to your regulators that you are compliant. If you've got investors, that you can demonstrate that you are robust, to give you more strategic guidance of where you spend your money, and obviously adapting to what the future looks like when it comes to cyber threats. So if you want practical steps, I can't sit here and tell you all the things you need to do. I.e., how do you go and configure your 365, or how do you configure MFA? That's all individual to you. It starts with a risk assessment, which leads to a strategy, which then leads to you having a governance, assurance, and oversight. And all of those things, if you follow that process, and use the right people to do it, you will have peace of mind, because you can prove that your strategy is working, and you're not hoping that your strategy is working. Some of the services that we offer obviously align with the things I've been talking about today: cyber risk assessments, pen testing, simulated attacks, incident response tests, policies, governance, staff training, supply chain assurance audits. Do you know how strong your supply chain is and whether it poses a significant threat to you? So my final thoughts before we move on. I've got one last poll to do, and another piece of business is preparation is key. In cyber risk management, is get your risk assessment done and get set up as best as you can to reduce the chances of this happening. It's a leadership responsibility. If you are a leader in an organization, you've got to get to grips with this if you aren't already, and get hold of it and get it done. Seek expert advice, cyber risk management specialists. It isn't the same as IT. We would work with your IT. We would work with you. We don't work on instead of them. We understand what we need to do, and then we'll help them get those things in place. It's expected of you. I mean, you would expect it of yourself, because you want to be safe. You want to be operationally resilient, but your regulators, your supply chain, and the government expect you to do this as well. And yes, we can help you. So with all of those things said, and I appreciate I've rattled through a lot of content today, I'm sorry, but some of you might be sitting there thinking you need some help, and we're just going to run a little poll just to say, look, would you be interested in a free, no obligation 60-minute cyber review? So that's someone like me sitting down with you, asking you some questions, talking about the things that you do at the moment, and we may be able to say, do you know what, sounds like you've got it covered, or it may be able to say, look, we've got some recommendations of things that could help you. And so if you're happy for us to reach out to you, if you click A, you're very interested, B, somewhat, or not interested at all, but that's fine, that's not a problem. But it could be that that we could help you. So just leave that for another five or so seconds as people are answering it, and then I'm going to move on to the next exciting slide. As I say, I'm just waiting for my screen to go green, which will tell me the poll has ended. And here we go. So if you've enjoyed today's session, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is episode 1 in a series of webinars we're conducting this year, and our next one is on the 25th of February, and I think it'll interest a lot of people because it's about AI. We always get asked about AI, and it covers, it's multifaceted what it covers, but what we're starting to see is how it's starting to turbocharge cyber attacks. Because it is making, as it says there, makes attacks more scalable, so bigger, they adapt better, it's harder to detect, and so again we can give you more answers, hopefully, that can help you along the way. So that will be being advertised, but you can always reach out to us and get yourself registered for the next one in February. So that leaves me to say thank you very much for joining today. That's who I am. Those are my contact details. If you wanted to reach out to me directly, then please do, or you can get hold of me on LinkedIn there. But I do appreciate you joining in today, and we're not going to take questions because we've run out of time, but as you can see with my email address there, if you've got any questions or if you want to meet up, we can go through anything that you have. So thank you very much, and goodbye.